partnerships, positive impact partnerships. And that's what we were discussing in our next roundtable, starting with Vito Gaudiano, CEO of OpenEd Technologies, Moses Kimani, founder and CEO of Lentra Africa, Mario Molteni, CEO of For Impact Foundation, Remo Pedon, Technical Committee Finance and Credit of Confindustria, and Marco Piccolo, CEO of Renaldi. So I'd like to call them all to the stage, and I'd like to start with Marco Piccolo, the last on the program. Renaldi is an Italian business which has already been operational in sustainability for many years. I think you close your factory at 5 o'clock every day, every afternoon, so that people can go home. Yes, because many of your workers are women, so you want them to go home at 5 o'clock. So you close doors and everyone goes home at 5. But that's not why we asked you to talk about, to join our round table. You were actually called upon to produce in one of these African countries, in particular Burkina Faso, where you are now producing shea butter, which is essential for your Renaldi cosmetic line. And tell us how you got there, because it's not something that just happened by chance. Where do I go and produce? It's not that Burkina Faso comes to mind immediately. Well, we have a friend, a missionary. She's a sister. And both my mother and I have often worked with missionaries. And this friend of ours, this nun, lives in the city of Bobo Dioulasso in Burkina Faso. And she phoned my mom one day and she said to her, Maria Grazia, here children are dying of hunger. The women want to work. How can you help us? And my mom said, well, we produce cosmetics. But she thought about it and she said, well, I'm buying shea butter in Europe, in Italy. If you can procure it, if you can process it, then I'll buy a significant amount from you. So we gave them a form of hope. And what they did is they actually almost industrialized themselves, and they managed to produce 100 kilos for us. So we decided we would create a product line based solely on the shea butter coming from Burkina Faso. So we buy this shea butter from Burkina Faso at the same quality, at the same level as here in Italy. The difference is that we're actually incrementing the value in Africa, in Burkina Faso, by 25 times. So we went to this little town in Burkina Faso to meet with these women. And because we saw that there was also the consumption, the use of these products at a local level, we brought down our machinery and we taught them how to produce these cosmetics, and they're actually producing and selling in situ. So we're not just creating wealth at local level so that they can live dignified lives. These are 25 women who actually managed to sustain small communities. We're also helping a local business to support itself, to move forward. So where these women were once poor and were once living on meager scraps, creating a business for them means that we're helping them to think not just about tomorrow, but about the day after tomorrow. So we're creating wealth and changing mentalities. That's something small that we're doing, just 25 women. But these are small seeds of hope that we're trying to sow. This is a very interesting experience because you didn't only teach them how to extract the essence, but you also provided them with the technology, with a stop-and-go policy. So if you go and produce with too much technology in these settings, you might not actually get the results you're looking for. You might not be able to involve more people. Is that true? Yes, you need to act wisely, because obviously what we do here cannot be transferred there. What we don't want to, we want these women to be able to work. We aren't going to use electricity, for example. We wanted these women to actually be there and to do the labor themselves, not to use machine. We didn't want machinery to do the job for them. So we also ensure that there are companies, local businesses that can ensure the maintenance. We also use mixers from a kitchen, so kitchen appliances, and we help them with these appliances to create a big pot in which they can actually create their cosmetics. So we need to adapt technology. But of course, what needs to be done and looked at is transport. When we talk about infrastructure, we complain often about a lack of infrastructure in terms of transport here in Italy. But yes, it's true. There needs to be a continuous upgrade to be competitive compared to the EU, the United States. But the problem here is that you cannot export, you cannot import here in Italy these products. These are countries, though, that cannot even organize local transport. Yes, we actually produce thousands of pieces every single day for third companies. It would be easy to say to the multinationals that we work for, do you want to use the shea butter of our project? In this way, you will be using it as a market lever and guarantee the same good price. But unfortunately, today there are no containers coming from Burkina Faso to Italy, so we need to use the volunteers of the ONLUS associations that operate in Burkina Faso, and every time they bring 35 kilos of the product in their suitcases every time they come to Italy. They're possibly stopped then at customs by the sniffer dogs because they're transporting 35 kilos of shea butter. Well, no, not really. But now let's look at another project.
We have another project, and I would like to ask Mario Molteni now, who is the CEO from E4 Impact Foundation. The project was launched for this very reason. In other words, let's help them in their country of origin. That's not the exact intention, but it's perhaps the opposite. In other words, we want them to have the instruments, the tools that they need in order to develop, to grow from a labor, an employment perspective, but from an academic point of view as well. In other words, with MBAs there, we can help young Africans learn what our youth consider to be their bread and butter. They go to the Bocconi University, they go to university in London, the more fortunate ones, they can study business administration there, but it's not so easy in Africa. So what have you done to give them the opportunity to learn how to create, how to establish a business? Mr. Molteni, well, first of all, I can tell you that we began in 2010, which was when this emergency hadn't yet come to be. In any case, we did focus on partnership, on the partnership approach. We wanted to partner with African universities in order to offer a master's program, a European-level master's program, but cheaper, as it were, so that the middle class in Africa could afford those studies, because they are the drivers of the future of entrepreneurship. So we had a threefold goal. First of all, to develop the so-called impact entrepreneurs. Then we wanted to enable capacity building through the university studies. And then my third point, as you yourself was mentioning, was to build a bridge between Italy and African countries. I've just come from a 3-day meeting, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. In fact, we had 18 presidents of African universities, and in an 8-year time frame, we began with one experience, and then that turned into 12 experiences, and there are 6 more that are ready to come on board. This is a partnership that has now become consolidated. Now, with regard to this MBA program, they've basically trained more than 800 entrepreneurs already in these countries, because we don't only take people who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs, but we take people who are already entrepreneurs and who have some sort of idea that they want to work with. So with this MBA program, we created an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, and we have all sorts of relations with the local setting, with businessmen, banks, investors, foundations, and so on, and they can be at the service of Italian companies. And we have so many Italian businesses that would be interesting to know. For example, just the other day, we invited a network that was established in Italy, but that is now operating in all of African countries, and they are in the business of logistics. So this is our role. We put people together. We get people together because this is the need. For example, an Italian businessman has to be put into contact with small local entrepreneurs so that they can create partnerships. There are more than 50 already in Africa, so we need to enable these contacts and multiply these relations, and that's how we can multiply the impact. What have you found in Africa in terms of entrepreneurship that you didn't expect to see? Well, we saw that there was a great desire to do business. Now, I didn't have this experience directly, but in Africa, the general atmosphere is that of rebuilding, as we had it in Italy. They have these large, huge spaces, areas in which to pursue this building effort. We have digital technologies, the connectivity, solar energy technologies, and this is all providing new conditions for doing business. So we have a rate of entrepreneurship in Africa that we don't see anywhere else. Now, where's the problem? Well, if there is only a need to fulfill, in other words, to find a job, then that's not what we're looking for. What we want is to foster innovation. I'm not talking about top technology innovation. I'm talking about medium technology, where the technologies that already exist in our country, for example, are offered. They're made available in a very sensible manner, adapting them, of course, but they can ensure a level of productivity that African businesses don't yet have. Okay, we have an example. You were talking about these African companies. You talked about innovation, new business models and technologies. And the example that we're going to cover now will be illustrated by Moses Kimani, who is the founder and CEO of Lentera Africa. Lentera operates in the field of precision agriculture. And thanks to satellite sensing, remote sensing, and a whole new generation of sensors that can pick up real-time data on the ground. With that, we can inform farmers as to where they need to irrigate, where they don't need to irrigate, where they need to use weed killers, where they don't, and what farmland needs to be grown as a priority, and so on. So we think that it's a question of productivity here in Europe, whereas in many of these countries in Africa, it'll make the difference between a crop and harvesting, which will help a family to be sustainable, and years of famine, of course. So it is important for the lives of these people. Lentera cooperates with the E4Impact Foundation. We'll be speaking to open the technology soon as well.
What's the impact of your activity in farming in your country? What are you doing now?
Okay, so it is getting increasingly difficult, more and more difficult for farmers in Africa to grow crops more sustainably and more profitably because of climate change. I think there's nowhere we see the effect of climate change as we see in Africa, and especially with smallholder farmers, because there's increasing drought, increasing flooding, more pests and diseases. At the same time, you think about Africa has very low agricultural productivity, yet more than 60% of the arable land in the world is in Africa, so it's a big opportunity. Now, when you looked at this, and also you realize the last 2 or 3 decades have seen a tremendous explosion of technology in Africa. Think about mobile technology, think about mobile banking. I think in many ways, Africa is a leader in the world in mobile banking. And how we started Lentera, we saw that there's this particular need to help farmers adapt to climate change. And we focus on precision agriculture, we focus on climate smart inputs, so the right inputs, and we focus on conservation agriculture. With regarding to our precision agriculture, like you mentioned, it's using remote sensors, drones, and satellite images to provide farmers with the right information of when to plant, when to irrigate, when to use the plant protection products. And we feel this is a good opportunity because currently the push has been, in Africa, let's use more chemicals, more fertilizer, follow the route that the rest of the world used. But we see an opportunity to jump a technology here and go from basic, very low productivity to smart agriculture, to smart farming. Now you might ask, I mean, for the small farmer in Africa, use of drones, use of satellites, this all looks like, rocket science. Can it apply? But there's a very big appetite, especially among the youth in Africa, for technology. And when we use drones, for example, to collect information or satellite imaging, then it becomes something cool, something interesting for young people to engage in agriculture. And I think that's the generation that will really have a big impact. In this regard, I think we've collaborated a lot with OpenNet. You'll talk about them later. In how do we use the satellite technology and satellite imaging to give direct information to the farms?
Ecco, I wanted to ask something about this. What are the results of this cooperation with Italy, with the E4Impact Foundation and OpenNet?
So E4 Impact Foundation and OpenNet have been excellent partners. For one, when we joined the E4 Impact Accelerator back in 2018, we spent a lot of time with their mentors looking at our business model. So we are a startup and started the company in 2016, and we were struggling to scale, to reach more customers. How do we translate our product to be attractive to the customers, to the farmers? So we really looked deep into our business model. They came and helped us to validate our product, to try out different ways of looking at it. And specifically with regards to precision farming, they introduced us to OpenNet. Now, we had the idea then to use the satellite imaging, but we did not know how do we start? We're in Africa, we're in Kenya. Where do we start getting the satellite images? How do we translate them into a form that the farmers can understand? How do we connect remote sensors to our network and to the satellite imaging? Now, E4 Impact introduced us to OpenNet. Vito here, also an entrepreneur. We got along very well. He saw us from an entrepreneur perspective. He has a strong engineering team that helped us with our own technical engineers to develop, to program our sensors. Now they communicate very well with the database. In summary, the effect has been, in the farms where we are applying this sort of precision farming, you're seeing up to 60% increase in yield.
60?
Yeah, already. And it's still in the early stages. And we expect, in some farms, for example, it has meant a difference between a total loss of the crop and getting some harvest. So it is a game changer.
Quindi 60% di...
So 60% of production increase thanks to these technologies, and this has been implemented not just thanks to the partnership between Lentera, but also thanks to OpenNet Technologies, which gave a helping hand from a technological perspective. So I wanted to understand from Vito Guaidiano, the CEO of OpenNet Technologies, what did you find in Africa, and why in the beginning did you have this idea of actually setting up an accelerator there? It's not something that you would think about, for example, setting something up in Burkina Faso, so to say. Well, OpenNet Technologies is a telecoms communication. We deal primarily with satellites. We've been cooperating with the European Space Agency and the Italian Space Agency, and we've been operational in Africa since 2008. We are a small, medium-sized enterprise. We have the DNA of an SME. And there was this need when we went to Africa to become operational in Africa to create telecommunications networks. We didn't want to open an office in every single African country where we wanted to become operational. There was this need, though, to apply our work to different sectors, and we did so in 13 African countries. We set up the election systems, for example, in these countries. We helped also with IT systems in schools, always in Africa. But we always had this SME DNA in us. And all our activities started with an international partnership, but they are supported thanks to contracts that we sign locally with our operators, for example, with Moses. And that's the reason why the European Space Agency and the Italian Space Agency, thanks to a project that we set up together called SparkMe, decided to create an acceleration program, 2 accelerators in particular, one in Matera here in Italy and one in Nairobi. And this was a very positive experience for us because we worked together with the MBA that has been set up and to see how we can transfer technological know-how to these businesses that are developing their businesses. So that's also a way for us to build our business, and the results, I must say, are impressive and encouraging. There is, in fact, a demand, and the technology that we can offer, this low-cost technology, is not invasive in terms of the production processes of these businesses that have been accelerated, but it really helps us to have an immediate and positive outcome. We can bring something to areas where there is no other connectivity, and this means that with this technology we can create a series of other services that these businesses that we are stimulating, that we're helping, can actually provide. So it's a real virtuous cycle. So you can honestly say that technology is not actually broadening the gap, but for these countries, they can be seen as something more and as an added value. Yes, definitely. As I was saying earlier, we started working with non-governmental organizations that were providing charity activities, basically. They would bring books to rural schools. But thanks to our small antenna, thanks to our small solar panel, which feeds this system, we actually brought tablets and entire literary world to these schools. And with the local schools, with local departments in South Africa, for example, they've actually contracted these services out after we first stepped in. So it's not charity. It's something that becomes enduring. It's something that is very positive in these small villages where we actually went and took action. We've managed to overcome this digital divide, but not just the digital divide. We've managed to overcome also the educational divide, which is a key topic for education.
Un imprenditore che
And now let's move on to another story. An investor who is still investing in Ethiopia, Remo Pedon, who is the Vice President in Confindustria and a member of the Technical Committee for Internationalization in Confindustria. And he's also an entrepreneur in food, in legumes in particular. And you decided to operate in Ethiopia a few years back, and you started with a small lab, as it were, and now it's become something much larger. So tell us about this growth over the past few years. Well, first of all, the protocol that we signed at Confindustria, at E4 Impact and the International Trade Center of last year is quite extraordinary, I must say, because with this protocol we can help entrepreneurs to go directly to Africa and to seek partners there and to develop a business for their companies, but also in the local setting in general. Now, I started before that. In fact, I went to Ethiopia in 2003, and in 2004 I was looking for a partner. It was hard for me to find a partner in those years. So as I said, in 2004 I decided to build a factory, a facility, and in doing that I realized that before operating I needed a school. So I built a school, and there are still 180 children attending that school. It is inside our compound, and I started exporting a product. I'm talking about beans here, and they're typically not eaten in Ethiopia. And this all began with smaller volumes, and we are now talking about 10,000 families of farmers. We're working with these numbers now. And there are many workers and employees who came to start this kind of operation, and then they set up their own factory, their own business, and now they're also exporting their product. So you see, in that area, we created a district, as it were, an industrial district, and businesses which aren't only important for us, but for these communities in Ethiopia. So is this an exportable model? Can it be duplicated? And what would you tell an entrepreneur who is considering doing this kind of business in these countries? I think it can be replicated, it can be repeated as a model. And tomorrow in Confindustria Vicenza, I will be at an event on Ethiopia. We'll have the Ethiopian ambassador to Italy there at this event, and we are trying to seek out colleagues who might like to pursue the same kind of model. In other words, to set up a business in Africa and, in this particular case, in Ethiopia. I think it can be done. Of course, there will be many problems to resolve, logistics issues being one of them, and we need to set up European standards there. In the beginning, it isn't always easy for locals to understand these, but after a while, they are able to set those standards. and follow them. And as we set up this factory in 2005, and in more recent years now, I joke about this with my colleagues in Ethiopia. I said, "You want to come back to Italy?" And they always say, "No, we love it here." It's very cold where you live in Italy, so we would much rather stay here. I suppose Minister Salvini will be very happy to hear that. Let me begin now with another very quick round, and we'll start with Mr. Piccolo. Let's see what you can tell us about these activities and this kind of production, this so-called responsible production, where there is a sort of ethical dimension, more so than in multinationals. Now, is there a payback here? What about image, price, reputation, notoriety? What can you say about this experience? You say that it's not philanthropic, but shea butter can be produced elsewhere with fewer problems with regard to transportation, for example. So I know that to monetize is not a very nice word, but how can this be seen as a competitive advantage for you? We do third-party tolling. So basically, I have a small brand, but I can't really operate on the market because I would become a competitor for my own customers, my own clients. So I cannot maximize the benefits, as it were, from this narrative. Now, well, as I said, we're not philanthropists. I'm making money like Bill Gates, and then I'm giving money on the other side. No, what we can do is to rethink these economic mechanisms. Now, in the future, I'll go to the supermarket and find two identical creams. They'll have the same quality, the same price, but I know that one of them activates mechanisms which boost, which foster dignity in work. So this is the value added. We can link sustainability, ethics, and cooperation to a market economy which is indeed sustainable. So we work with a company called Benefit, and we started in 2008. We're now making more than 25% a year than we were. And our profit is not our priority. It just comes on its own because the people that work for us are engaged. They know that they're participating in this wonderful effort. Even if they're just screwing a cap on a bottle, they know that that's part of a bigger project and it is important, an important part of the project. So they're engaged, they're committed. They do this from the bottom of their hearts, and we grow. So, as I said, we have a plus 35% in terms of our sales, but that's not what our priority is, sales or profit. It all just happens. So when you have an additional order of plus 36%, do they have to work all night long to fulfill that order? Because you said we just have to do that. Well, sometimes we have to do that, yes, of course, if we want to stay on the market. Mr. Molteni, now, what have you learned? You try to teach this idea of entrepreneurship, to develop it, and what have you learned from that effort? Is there anything that you didn't know before you started, and maybe it would have been better to do something different? What have you learned from this experience? Well, I think that we've learned so many things. First of all, because we worked with certain assumptions, but we started working with them right away, and we had to, make some adjustments. And we have had to become Africa-centric because we're working on African cases. The marketing is African. And we also learned to simplify things. Numbers are very important, but in order to teach people about numbers, we have to choose the more important ones and insist and repeat and focus on that in particular. And we also learned about the importance of connections. For example, we have traditional teachers, we know that, but it is way more important to have conference calls with the entrepreneurs that have experience and that have technologies and that have opportunities to offer. So that's our style. It's changed quite a bit. And there's another dimension. We have reduced traditional forms of teaching, and now we use coaching and mentoring and one-to-one teaching. models. And I'm going to take this opportunity this morning to make an appeal to our business and our entrepreneurs who are here. In order to grow these entrepreneurs, to help them to develop, why don't you promote the concept of volunteer work, maybe 1 or 2 hours a month to just have a chat with a businessman who's maybe operating in the same sector but who's working in a different country. So this is a very sound form of enrichment, of learning for Italian entrepreneurs and managers, and I think it is a wonderful opportunity for our African entrepreneurs because it gives them a chance to open up their horizons and to find new opportunities. So if you are interested in this idea, I would be very happy to work with you in the next couple of days. Thank you very much. And Moses Kimani, I would like to ask you this question.
For African entrepreneurs, money, technology or know-how? Quali sono i bisogni principali oggi per l'imprenditoria africana? Servono soldi, serve tecnologia o serve conoscenza? O un po' di tutto?
So I think on one side you find so many funds and so many investors saying they cannot get enough good ideas. And where I'm from, we have so many businesses that are saying, oh, we cannot get the funding. So there's a bottleneck somewhere. And I think what E4Impact Foundation is trying to do with us, for example, so we would send so many applications to so many funds, but we were getting no response. Working with them to see how do you become investor ready, how do you put your financials, how do you communicate to the investors. Now we have the opposite problem that we have so many people coming to us saying, hey, we want to invest in you. We're saying, wait, no, let's choose more carefully. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in getting businesses in Africa to be investor ready. I think the funds are there, the business opportunities are there, but there's a bit of a spark that is needed to push this. And I think this kind of exposure, this kind of connections with Vito, he's gone through these problems in the past when his own company. So that mentorship is really, really useful. Thank you.
Ecco, Vito Gaudiano.
Vito Gaudiano and then Remo Pedon. What are your next projects in Africa? We're extending the network with the E4Impact because we have created a very positive model. E4Impact was already operational and active in the network, and we need to support with the technological side of things. This is very important for us because, as we heard from Moses, the application is very varied, and we also specifically, as a business, want to ensure that there is a new flow, a new frontier that is opening at global level. And there's this new frontier with this these new models that we are seeing in this sector in particular. So we can also ascertain from the statistics that the work that we are doing in space technology is also done by our space economy, by space work. So thank you very much to E4Impact for its work. Remo Pedon, I would say we need to continue because the difficulties that we encountered at the start of our project in 2004, 2005, 2006, up until 2008, were many. I remember, for example, the first time I went to Ethiopia, I discovered that they had a calendar which they use with 13 months, with a 7-year difference compared to Italy. So I really needed to learn new things. And now that everything is going well, now that the Ethiopian economy is doing well, we need to continue along this path, most definitely. Thank you. Thank you very much to all our speakers of this round table. Thank you very much.